December 7, 1941. The sky over Pearl Harbor fills with the roar of enemy aircraft, and chaos unfolds below. But imagine, parked on a quiet airstrip away from the explosions, sits a jet no one could comprehend. A 2025 F-22 Raptor with modern stealth, upgraded missiles, and radar tracking so advanced it can lock on to dozens of targets before they even know it's there. We'll test what one best-in-the-world jet could realistically do against a 1941 raid. What it would stop, what it couldn't, and why. It can supercruise, sustaining supersonic flight without afterburners. The question is no longer whether it's faster or stronger. It's whether, in a world of propeller-driven planes and manual gunnery, such a machine could truly change the outcome. The 2025 Raptor that shouldn't be there. In 1941, air combat is confined to propeller-driven fighters, pilots aiming by eye, and the sharpest detection tool being a watchful lookout. Into this world of maps, compasses, and squadron formations appears something decades ahead of its time, a 2025 F-22 Raptor. It sits on a strip surrounded by crews unfamiliar with jet turbines, its faceted fuselage covered in treatments built to scatter radar return. In this era, radar itself is still an experimental tool, scarcely seen outside specialized labs. Designed for the most advanced air battles of the 21st century, this aircraft has been dropped into a sky where fast means barely a third of its cruising speed. By 2025, the F-22 has gone beyond its original role as a pure air superiority fighter. Years of upgrades have refined its design. Newer radar-absorbent coatings further cut its signature, even against lower frequency systems. This stealth does not make it truly invisible. Modern testing shows reflections can vary depending on aspect, and in certain circumstances low-frequency radar may still detect large aircraft. But against 1941 sensors, it would remain effectively undetectable until seen by eye. Its mission computers fuse data from radar, infrared, and passive receivers into one integrated view, updating in fractions of a second. In a fight where spotting the enemy usually means picking out a silhouette against the sky, this digital picture is like seeing through clouds and distance without limitation. Its missiles reflect similar advances. Long-range AMRAAM variants such as the AIM-120D3 can engage targets at tens of miles, and in ideal conditions may approach or exceed the order of magnitude of 100 miles. Actual reach depends on radar performance, target size, and geometry, but in a 1941 engagement, such distances are beyond imagination. The AIM-9X Block II plus heat seeker, with its high off-boresight capability, can home in on maneuvering opponents from angles where no gun could track. Guided entirely by electronics and pilot input through a helmet-mounted display, these weapons would seem unreal to someone accustomed to leading a target with fixed iron sights. The mismatch is immediate. This fighter was built for worlds filled with search radars, missile batteries, and aircraft with their own long-range sensors. In 1941, its radar cross-section shrinks against a backdrop with no radar receivers at all. Pilots in the attacking force would have no way to register the threat until missiles arrive. The concept of beyond visual range becomes something else entirely when the other side cannot shoot back until they can see you, and they will never see you in time. Its performance deepens the gap. In operational use, the Raptor can supercruise around Mach 1.5, with testing showing sustained flight above Mach 1.7 or 1.8 without afterburners, and sprinting near or past Mach 2 with afterburner in short bursts. Warplanes over Pearl Harbor might top out near 330 miles per hour. Even if they caught a glimpse, there would be no realistic way to overtake it or set up a shot. A climb rate to altitudes exceeding 65,000 feet, combined with thrust vectoring control for rapid changes in attitude, allows the Raptor to choose both the moment and altitude of an engagement, exiting before the enemy can respond. For a sense of how foreign it would feel, picture a 1941 fighter's cockpit. A simple panel of dials, a gun sight, a radio limited to voice transmissions. The F-22 pilot's view is a synthesized environment, symbols marking hostile aircraft with speed, bearing, and range updated constantly by onboard computation. Weapons release is calculated for the highest probability of success based on kinematics, not guesswork. This is not an incremental change in capability, but a leap so complete that opposing pilots would lack even the reference points to understand what was happening. The Raptor's stealth in 2025 form relies not just on its structure, but on managing its emissions. It can remain in near-complete radio silence, collecting signals passively, supplementing radar tracks with infrared search. The Japanese formation depends on flight timetables, visual navigation, and basic radio coordination, none of which can betray a silent aircraft orbiting unseen above. Internally, its main bay holds 6 AIM-120D3s. Its side bays carry 2 AIM-9X Block II+ missiles, and for close-range contingencies, it retains the M61A2 Vulcan cannon, a 6-barrel 20mm gun carrying 480 rounds and capable of extremely high rates of fire. Of all its armament, only this gun would be recognizable to contemporary aviators, though with a cyclic rate several times their best, even it would feel alien in effect. In 1941, hitting an enemy before it could react was rare and typically the realm of ground-based flak. For the Raptor, it is standard. Engagements would be dictated entirely by its pilot's decisions, when radar illuminates, when weapons leave the bay, when to withdraw. Enemy crews would find themselves under attack from a direction and distance they could not predict, the exchange ending before they had even turned toward the source. Place it now on that December morning. Hundreds of Japanese aircraft approach in fixed formations, cruising at prearranged altitudes, entirely unaware that a supersonic fighter has already flown out to meet them. From above, the Raptor can drop into attack runs, fire, and then climb back beyond reach. It can operate well above any bomber or fighter ceiling, diving through the limits of their vision before disappearing again. The asymmetry in this engagement is so stark that the only constraints are missile count and available fuel. That imbalance is why the phrase "shouldn't be there" fits. Everything the Raptor was designed to overcome would overwhelm 1941 defenses. From the attacking pilot's perspective, its movements and effects would be beyond explanation. And yet, it remains a single aircraft. Against an incoming force numbering in the hundreds, its presence alone will not decide the battle's every outcome. Still, the shape of that battle will shift dramatically the moment those formations encounter a weapon they cannot see and a foe they cannot chase. What those formations consist of and how they are arranged as they close on their target determines how this meeting unfolds next. The foes of 1941. In the early hours of that morning, the Japanese striking force advanced toward Oahu in a meticulously organized assault. A total of 353 aircraft, divided into 2 massive waves, moved in precise coordination. Each type had a specific role: fighters to clear the skies, dive bombers to smash stationary targets, and torpedo planes to cripple ships riding at anchor. The Mitsubishi A6M0 was the escort and guardian for the formation. For 1941, it was an impressive machine, highly maneuverable, capable of roughly 330 miles per hour in level flight, and able to reach altitudes around 33,000 feet. Its armament combined 2 20mm cannons in the wings with 2 7.7 machine guns in the nose. These weapons could be lethal in turning engagements against other propeller-driven planes, but only once the Zero's pilot could see and close on the target. Visual identification and positioning through sustained maneuver were at the core of its fighting style. Slower but equally vital, the Nakajima B-5N Kate torpedo bombers carried the attack's main anti-ship weapon. With top speeds under 240 miles per hour and payloads limited to a single torpedo or a few bombs, they relied on low, steady approaches over water to launch effectively. Pilots had to judge altitude, distance, and release timing by sight alone, holding course long enough for defenders to get a clear shot, if those defenders were in the right place at the right moment. Adding vertical striking power were the HD-3A Val dive bombers. In combat, a Val would climb above its target, drop almost straight down to aim, and release its bomb at a visual cue before pulling out under heavy G-force. In level flight, they managed around 230 to 240 miles per hour. Accuracy against fixed positions could be good, but the climb out after a dive left them slow and exposed to any aircraft ready to exploit the opening. All of these aircraft operated within the limits of their era's technology. Target spotting depended entirely on eyeballs. Navigation was a matter of compass headings, dead reckoning, and landmarks. Radios were available but limited in speed and clarity, so formation flying and pre-planned coordination were the primary means of control. Weapons were fixed in place. Hitting a target meant maneuvering the whole aircraft into the right position. In groups, these formations could protect one another and deliver concentrated firepower. Against enemies without radar-guided interception, these tactics were effective. On the American side, early warning capability around Hawaii existed but was minimal. A few ground-based radar stations could detect incoming aircraft at limited ranges, but coverage was incomplete, resolution was poor, and there was no integrated system to build a real-time, wide-area picture. Interpretation depended on human operators, and communication delays meant even good observations often arrived too late to matter. This lack of situational awareness is one reason the historical attack achieved near-total surprise. It is within this framework that a 2025 F-22's sensing ability would become transformational. Japanese aircraft crews in 1940, one could only react to what they saw, usually when the opponent was already in firing position. A Raptor pilot could identify and track these formations at ranges stretching well beyond the horizon, long before any visual spotting could occur. Even without transmitting radar signals, onboard electro-optical and infrared systems could detect engine heat at distances that fully encompassed the scale of the entire 1941 engagement zone. Weapon reach tells the same story. A Zero's cannons were practically effective to about 700 yards, its machine guns less. Defensive fire from bombers, whether rifle caliber or light cannon, could barely exceed those ranges and was effective only if the attacker flew into it. In contrast, the AIM-120D3 inside the Raptor's bays could destroy a target many miles away, even allowing for realistic constraints. The difference places the F-22 comfortably outside any retaliatory shot from the moment it engages. Maneuvering capability only widens that gap. Japanese aircraft required broad turning arcs to reverse direction or pursue a climbing target, and their climb rates were modest by modern standards. The Raptor could reposition vertically or horizontally faster than they could complete a single turn, choosing whether to remain unseen above them or to slash through at closing speeds they could not match. Once it fired a radar-guided missile, no defensive aerobatics available to them could break the lock. This vulnerability was amplified by the reliance on synchronized groups. Every squadron's actions were timed relative to the others. Removing even a few aircraft early, especially critical bombers or lead fighters, could ripple through the formation, causing late arrivals, unsynchronized attacks, and diminished mutual protection. Breaking those formations apart before they reached their targets could reduce the combined weight of their strike without the Raptor ever entering gun range. In 1941, such disruption before contact had no precedent. Even the fastest U.S. fighters had to launch after a sighting report, racing to intercept near the harbor itself. The Japanese structure assumed there was no way to be engaged while still far offshore. A modern stealth fighter erases that assumption. Engagement can begin while the attacking force is still over open water, in what to them feels like the safe transit to target. For the pilots and crews on the receiving end, there would be no warning. No dashboard lights, no audible missile alerts, just sudden destruction among their ranks. Combat awareness ended at the edge of the canopy glass, and any opponent beyond it simply didn't exist until seen. Even if a Raptor chose to close within visual distance, the moment would be fleeting, vanishing again in seconds at speeds they couldn't match. The fight would remain one-sided from start to finish. This is the measurable scale of the disparity. Formations armed and trained for combat within a mile, facing an attacker that can destroy them from dozens of miles away, guided by a view of the battle space that for them would be unimaginable. Skill and discipline would not bridge that gap. Before they realized they were under attack, the engagement could already be decided in someone else's favor. And that advantage rests not only in flight performance, but in the tools it brings to the fight. Tools that do not exist anywhere in the 1941 world. Lethal upgrades for a new century. The 2025 F-22 Raptor arrives with armament tailored for the most demanding air combat of the modern era, capabilities far beyond anything needed for the slower, less agile bombers and fighters of 1941. Central to that arsenal are its beyond visual range weapons. The F-22 can carry up to 6 AIM-120 AMRAAMs in its main bay. Modern variants of this missile dramatically extend engagement possibilities, with effective reach measured in tens of miles, and under favorable conditions, potentially out toward or beyond the 100-mile class, depending on target characteristics, altitude, and radar geometry. These missiles are guided by the aircraft's radar through a secure data link that transmits mid-course updates, allowing them to adjust trajectory if the target changes speed, heading, or altitude after launch. Against 1941 aircraft lacking radar warning receivers, timely evasion would be highly unlikely, especially for slower bombers locked into predictable, steady attack runs. The AIM-120 is built to survive in modern electronic warfare environments, with seekers and processors resistant to jamming and deceptive signals. None of that protection would even be challenged here. 1941 aircraft carry no electronic jammers at all, but it means the missile's engagement chain remains stable from launch to intercept. Fired from far outside the Japanese formation's weapon range, it gives the Raptor an enormous margin of safety in every shot. For closer engagements, the side bays house up to 2 AIM-9X Block II plus infrared-guided missiles. In the context of 2025 combat, these are short-range weapons, but their reach still extends well beyond the maximum effective gun distance of any World War II aircraft. The Block II Plus also supports lock-on after launch, which allows the missile to be fired before final target designation and high off-boresight targeting, enabling the Raptor to engage without pointing its nose directly at the opponent. This flexibility lets the pilot keep optimal speed and maneuvering profiles while still attacking, an edge that would make it almost impossible for a 1941 fighter to exploit the fleeting moments it might find itself in a firing position. Integrating these weapons is the product of more than just pilot skill. The Raptor's cockpit displays are driven by advanced mission computers, sensor fusion algorithms, and automated targeting aids. Data streams from its radar, infrared search and track, and electronic support measures combine into a single, continuously updated picture of the battlespace. The pilot can examine multiple targets simultaneously, with readouts on bearing, range, altitude, and closure that are calculated rather than guessed. In a mixed formation of bombers and fighters, the system can suggest engagement order based on proximity to defended assets or perceived threat. In 1941, such prioritization came down to what the pilot could identify in the moment through the windscreen. The last element of its offensive capabilities is the M.A. Vulcan cannon, an internally mounted 6-barrel 20 Gatling gun. Feeding from a 480-round drum and firing up to 6,000 rounds per minute, it sends dense bursts toward a target in fractions of a second. Even a very short trigger pull fills the air with dozens of projectiles, traveling at velocities that leave no practical dodging time. In modern service, it is generally held in reserve for situations where missiles cannot be used. But in this setting, against clustered, slow-moving airframes at close quarters, it would cut through an opponent before they could bring guns to bear. Upgrades in processing speed and data link throughput have markedly increased the effectiveness of the F-22's air-to-air weapons since its original introduction. Where earlier systems pushed timely updates to missiles, the current generation transmits nearly instantly, enabling a launched AIM-120 to adjust for last-second course changes more accurately. If a bomber in formation tried a banking descent in an attempt to throw off an intercept, the course correction from the launch aircraft would reach the missile with minimal delay, keeping it on an optimal path from separation to impact. Managing large numbers of airborne targets is another area where the 2025 Raptor moves far beyond its predecessors. In 1941, breaking up an incoming strike relied on multiple defenders attacking the leading elements and counting on confusion to ripple through the rest. Here, radar modes capable of track-while scan combine with sensor fusion to maintain locks on several aircraft at once. The pilot can launch AMRAAMs toward different targets during a single pass, each missile following its own dedicated guidance instructions while the launching aircraft maneuvers for the next shot. This ability does not remove constraints. Magazine size, time, and fuel still apply, but in practical terms, it means one aircraft can prosecute multiple widely spaced intercepts before the enemy formation has time to reorganize. Precision in deployment is equally important. In the 1940s, a trigger pull was informed by human judgment of relative speed, range, and lead angle, factors often difficult to judge while maneuvering under stress. The F-22's fire control algorithms calculate precise intercept solutions based on exact measurements of target motion at the moment of release. Every missile leaves the bay already on a trajectory optimized for its quarry's maneuvers, greatly boosting hit probability. In any Pearl Harbor scenario, these tools would allow the destruction of numerous enemy aircraft before they became aware of the threat. Combat doctrine has also shifted. A World War II pilot sought position behind an adversary and stayed there long enough to land accurate gunfire, a process that frequently exposed both planes to return shots. The Raptor's envelope allows engagements to end without ever entering visual range. When stealth is maintained, missiles can be launched from distances the target's crew cannot observe, turning what was once a swirling mutual chase into a single, unreachable firing point. While active jamming against 1941 aircraft would add little, the Raptor's emission control capabilities let it operate without betraying its presence. It can limit radar transmissions, rely on passive sensors to track heat and electronic noise, and adjust its profile to further reduce detection. Japanese pilots navigating by landmark and basic communication would have no way to recognize they were already under surveillance. When these capabilities are combined, low observability, long-reach weapons, rapid targeting updates, multi-target engagement, and precision guidance, they represent two separate worlds of combat existing in the same airspace. One operates entirely within visual references and manual gunnery. The other depends on integrated sensors and weaponry that complete an intercept before the opposing pilot even knows a hostile aircraft is airborne. Far from abstract advantages, these are mechanical and procedural differences that shape how an encounter begins and how quickly it is decided. That difference matters most in the space between detection and contact, the zone where the attacker still believes it is safe to proceed. In such a zone, the Raptor's pilot can act long before a 1941 formation ever sees a challenger on the horizon. The first contact. The first wave is still more than 100 miles from Pearl Harbor when the Raptor is set in position. To the Japanese crews, the horizon ahead is empty. Engine noise and the steady slipstream over the fuselage are the only sounds as they hold formation, Zeros leading, bombers arranged behind in tight columns. Every pilot focuses on spacing, timing, and the possibility of interceptors climbing from Oahu. In their minds, nothing separates them from the target but distance and minute. In the F-22 cockpit, the pilot is already running a wide-scan radar sweep. Across the helmet display, dozens of symbols appear, each tagged with coded information on heading, speed, altitude, and position relative to the formation. Faster escorts out front, slower, more densely packed bombers in the center and rear. It's all laid out clearly even though the nearest group is still far beyond visual range. Without this technology, such details would stay hidden until the formations were almost over the island. Here, identification and selection happen well before the Japanese are aware of any contact. Flight levels in the raid are dictated by the attack plan. Torpedo bombers hold low over the ocean for their release runs. Dive bombers cruise higher but still under 10,000 feet to maintain cohesion and fuel efficiency. The escort Zeros spread slightly, cycling gentle weaving patterns to watch above and ahead in the hope of spotting defenders. They expect any threat to be climbing to meet them, not descending from far higher and already in an attack position. The Raptor pilot assigns targets for the opening volley with precision, bomber leaders in the central elements. Removing those will force the rest to realign or break from their planned timing. The fire control system pairs specific weapons to each selected aircraft, calculating optimal intercept geometries. 6 AIM-120 AMRAAMs are brought online. In the main weapons bay, the internal doors will open only for fractions of a second, just long enough to release each missile, before snapping shut to preserve the jet's clean aerodynamic lines and stealth profile. From the ocean's surface, the first hint of action would be faint flashes in the upper atmosphere. A moment later, the missiles drop free and ignite, climbing on programmed paths before descending into their intercept courses. Each one flies toward a high-probability solution, refined in real time with updates from the Raptor's radar. The result is not certainty. Outcomes will still vary with target maneuvers and performance, but the odds are weighted heavily in favor of the attacker. There are no radar warning receivers among the Japanese aircraft, no systems to tell pilots they have been targeted. Tail gunners keep watch for visible threats, but at this range nothing is in sight. The first detonation rips apart a torpedo bomber without warning, leaving a scatter of debris over the water. In the seconds that follow, more aircraft in the formation are hit or damaged. Some burn, some spiral down, others simply fall out of formation, struggling to maintain control. To the crews still flying, losses seem to come from nowhere. In the F-22, the pilot watches icons blink from active to confirmed or probable kills. 4 targets are clearly destroyed, 2 more streaming smoke or flying erratically. The time elapsed from first launch to these results is under a minute. No Japanese aircraft have yet maneuvered aggressively because they have not yet identified an enemy in their battle space. The effectiveness lies not only in distance, but in sequence. In regular 1941 defense, to inflict such damage before the attackers reached Oahu would require a large defending force positioned well in advance. Multiple intercepts would have to be coordinated perfectly to meet the raid head-on. Here, one plane has struck before the escorts even shift from their steady patrol pattern. After firing, the Raptor maintains altitude. In modern combat, repositioning immediately reduces the chance of counterfire. Against this force, there is no such requirement, but the height advantage gives the pilot options for tracking or striking again. Radar confirms more inbound contacts behind the disrupted lead elements. Diving now for guns or heat seekers would burn the advantage of altitude and risk unnecessary visibility. So the pilot holds for a better opportunity against the trailing groups. Within the Japanese formation, confusion starts to set in. Communications are by radio voice only, so news of missing aircraft passes slowly. Escort fighters begin slight turns, searching for what they expect to be nearby interceptors, but without speed or climb performance to match, they have no realistic chance of contact. Instead, their investigation breaks their own clean sweeps ahead of the bombers, adding to the formation's growing disorder. From above, the Raptor's sensors follow each movement. Holes in the attacking formation widen. Moments that were plotted for simultaneous weapons release over the harbor will now arrive disjointed or not at all. The attack leader cannot easily reassign roles or resequence timing. There is no shared tactical picture to coordinate from. By the time instructions spread, the situation will have changed again. The most valuable impact here is not just the count of aircraft lost, but the deterioration of the plan itself. Every destroyed bomber removes cargo from the strike and disrupts its section's role in the attack. Anti-aircraft crews on the ground will face staggered targets instead of a single overwhelming mass, improving their own chances of defense. And none of this has yet involved a close-range fight or even visual contact between the sides. From the Raptor's view, the engagement has been controlled and brief, firing within parameters, making no unnecessary movements, and never entering the range envelope of 1941-era guns. This is the core advantage of beyond visual range combat, the ability to inflict damage without giving the opponent the opportunity to respond in kind. As the pilot angles toward the next inbound elements, many aircraft from the first wave still remain and continue forward. Weapons expended here reduce future options. Decisions now will shape what occurs over the harbor itself. Before committing to the next strike, the Raptor must retain its primary edge, remaining unseen for as long as possible. Invisible death! At high altitude, the Raptor moves as if it belongs to the sky itself. Its shape and surface are engineered to scatter radar energy away from a transmitter, designs meant to challenge even advanced modern detection networks. In a 1941 battle space, where airborne radar does not exist and ground-based systems are crude and scarce, those same design choices make it extremely difficult to detect using the tools of the time. Modern stealth is not absolute. Its effectiveness changes with the angle of observation and radar frequency, and certain low-frequency systems are more capable of spotting stealth shapes. But in this fight, none of those radars are present. Against the attackers closing on Oahu, the F-22 is simply never where their senses tell them to look. Its coatings, intended to absorb and diffuse radar signals, also alter how light plays across the airframe. The matte gray finish softens sharp reflections, leaving little for sunlight to catch. With no weapons hung beneath its wings, the jet offers no external shapes to cast revealing shadows far below. Even under perfect conditions, a pilot looking for a glint or silhouette would have to be staring in precisely the right patch of sky at precisely the right moment. And the Raptor would already be moving out of that sightline in seconds. Stealth in this setting is more than one trait. Here it rests on three advantages. First is sensor evasion. The radar invisibility to 1941 technology means there is no electronic cue of its approach. Second is speed. It can cross the miles from an unseen position to firing range faster than any visual scan can react. And third is reduced audibility at altitude. Its engines produce a smoother, less penetrating sound than the harsher tones of piston aircraft, and at high elevation that sound is often lost in wind noise to those flying far below. None of these factors alone would make it impossible to detect, but together they make sighting before engagement very unlikely. In a battle space where formation keeping depends entirely on visual awareness, this combination breaks the system. The Japanese formations fly with eyes scanning forward, up, or sideways for threats approaching along predictable vectors. The Raptor can remain several miles above or offset to the side, close in at will, and release weapons without entering anyone's cone of vision. By the time a head turns and a pilot tries to find the source, it is already accelerating away. Sound offers little warning to replace sight. In World War II combat, aircrews could hear the oncoming engines of enemy fighters and adjust their search accordingly. The Raptor's turbofans leave nothing that obvious. Only in the case of a low altitude, high-speed pass might someone below perceive the roar, and by then the event has passed them. Even if they turn toward the sound, closure rates this high leave no moment to line up a shot. When the first missile hits tear into the formation, no one below can locate the attacker. Airframes shatter mid-flight, torpedo bombers tumble into the sea, and dive bombers vanish in fire. Escort fighters instinctively break away from their positions to try to intercept, but without knowing an actual bearing, their move is guesswork. Gaps open around the bombers they were meant to protect, leaving those bombers more exposed to the next strike. In the Raptor's cockpit, sensors work without revealing their presence. Passive infrared tracks each engine's heat signature, which in these aircraft is completely unshielded. Combined with high-resolution radar, used sparingly and in short bursts, the pilot sees every target's relative position without any of those targets realizing they have been detected. Even the radio silence is an advantage. No emissions mean no electronic trail to follow back. From above, the scene becomes a mapped dataset on the pilot's display. Each contact is a stable icon moving along a plotted course. The size and heat of exhaust plumes stand out sharply in the infrared channel against the cold air at altitude. Structural outlines betray a bomber or fighter type instantly, helping the pilot decide which targets can most disrupt the attack. This clarity runs only one way. No attacking crew has anything approaching this view of the battle. Some in the formation may catch a flicker of white, perhaps a contrail forming and dissolving high overhead, or the brief flare of missile ignition. These glimpses are fleeting and difficult to track. In the discipline of close formation, breaking away in response is dangerous. Mid-air collisions or falling behind the group are real risks. Most opt to stay in position, even as anxiety grows. The absence of a visible opponent changes the psychology of the fight. In the air battles of this era, seeing your enemy marked the beginning of the engagement. Both sides maneuvered for advantage, and success came through outflying the other. Here, nothing like that occurs. There is no swarm of hostile aircraft diving in, no silhouette in the gun sight. Aircraft are simply removed from the sky without warning. Closing ranks as a protective measure only makes each missile more likely to harm multiple planes by forcing them into tighter, predictable lines. Flight leaders may order covering turns upward and behind, but the climb rate and speed of these planes mean they can never crest to where the Raptor may be holding. And if they do point toward it, motion relative to their viewpoint changes so quickly that the target is already gone. Each attempt to adapt the formation's defense results in momentary vulnerability elsewhere. Inside the F-22, the engagement unfolds without the pilot needing to come within cannon range. The only signature of the attack is the faint thermal bloom of a missile's motor, a signal too small and too brief for the human eye to catch from the ground or from far below. After firing, the jet can maneuver to a completely new vector at speeds no Zero or Val can hope to match, making any pursuit futile. Well before the coastline is in sight, the strike's cohesion is changing. Some bombers slip out of position to avoid falling debris. Escorts linger away from the bombers in hopes of spotting the lurking threat, leaving their charges open. Torpedo bombers, in particular, need level, straight runs to achieve their goal. Forced alterations to that path reduce the chance of success for every surviving aircraft. Weapons fall short, miss, or impact less critical targets simply because the approach was compromised. Radio traffic becomes more fragmented as losses mount. Calls to watch the skies above go unanswered or incomplete, drowned in static or cut short by pilot workload. Confusion passes forward to groups that have not even been attacked yet, increasing stress and reducing focus before their run begins. The speed of the attacker's own timetable works against them. There is no spare margin to regroup fully before crossing into the defended area. From the shoreline, early observers might begin to notice uneven timing in the waves coming in. Aircraft counts do not match expectations, gaps appear where none should be. Anti-aircraft gunners still must deal with planes arriving, but now those planes appear in irregular patterns. That irregularity is not accident. It is the consequence of an unseen presence pressing on the formation throughout its approach. Every crew facing this now understands, consciously or not, that they are absorbing losses from a source they cannot find. Somewhere above or ahead, beyond the limit of sight, a modern fighter is shaping the attack in real time. Even stripped of the aura of invulnerability, its ability to operate without giving away its position is enough to turn a predictable, disciplined strike into something fragmented and uncertain. And while that uncertainty is reshaping the battle already in motion, the scale of the challenge ahead is not shrinking. There are still many aircraft in the air, and the morning's attack is far from over. The demands of meeting more incoming targets will test how much influence one aircraft can exert before the next wave arrives. The second wave problem. Pearl Harbor's defenders on December 7th faced not one strike, but two. The first wave fielded 183 aircraft, the second another 170, 353 in total. Even for a jet as advanced as the F-22, those numbers create a problem measured in opportunities missed. No matter how far its radar can see or how quickly it can move, it cannot be everywhere at once. Finite weapons and time in the air mean that every attack run forces a choice about what to engage, and, just as importantly, what to let pass. After the first wave is disrupted, the pilot is immediately looking toward where to commit next. The radar picture still shows multiple groups: torpedo bombers approaching low along the harbor's edge, dive bombers beginning their steep descents toward airfields, escort fighters breaking pattern in a search for the unseen threat. Everyone in the formation is still moving on pre-planned headings. The pilot has to decide which group has the most critical impact if left untouched. That's the essence of tactical triage. Torpedo bombers might sink a ship in seconds, while fighters, though dangerous in a turning engagement, won't achieve that kind of strategic effect. Choosing to intercept one type gives direct protection to some targets while effectively abandoning others to their run. The Raptor's speed and climb let it make those trade-offs faster than any defender in 1940 one could have imagined. It can cross from one side of the harbor to the other in seconds, or leap upward tens of thousands of feet to meet bombers before they're overhead. Those capabilities mean it can appear in multiple sectors over the course of an engagement, but each move to one sector leaves another uncovered. And with two incoming waves timed to overlap defenses, a portion of the attackers will always operate outside its reach until the Raptor can reposition. The Japanese plan avoided bunching formations into a single block. Groups approached on staggered lines and altitudes to reduce collision risk and hit different points at once. If the Raptor finishes an interception over the north and must race south to catch another element, even supersonic flight eats away seconds that bombers need only to release their ordnance. Destroying them after the fact offers no protection to the ships or airfields hit in those moments. Geography compounds the problem. Pearl Harbor and its surrounding installations stretched vulnerability over multiple vectors: harbor entrances, mooring areas, several airfields, fuel depots, and dry docks. The first and second waves didn't come from identical bearings. In some cases, the second approached from different quadrants to catch defenders shifting positions. Alone, the Raptor has to rotate between these quadrants. That rotation creates windows, however brief, through which attackers can strike unopposed. Without a network of supporting aircraft or radar pickets, the F-22 can't receive real-time cueing to preposition for maximum effect. In its normal environment, data from other assets, AWACS, satellites, or fellow fighters would coordinate when and where it intercepts. Here, the only inputs are its own sensors and the pilot's judgment. Detecting all hostile formations at long range still doesn't change the fact that it can effectively reach and engage only a fraction before they arrive. When the second wave begins its inbound run, the challenge increases. By this point, the F-22 has already fired off part or most of its longer-range AMRAAMs. What remains may be AIM-9X short-range missiles or the Vulcan cannon. Sidewinders are effective but demand line-of-sight closure, sacrificing some of the standoff advantage that keeps the jet hidden. The gun is shorter range still, requiring the pilot to move within visual tracking distance of turrets and gunners, who, by now, are alert to sudden appearances overhead. Complications grow if, after destroying elements of the first wave, the Raptor ends up far from the second's line of approach. Choosing to chase fleeing attackers means moving away from intercept points for incoming ones. That could allow a clean early interception if they arrive along the same path. Yet if the second wave comes in from a different vector, the jet has to burn both time and fuel to relocate, accepting risk that some targets will strike unopposed before it arrives. Target priority in this phase is as much a strategic decision as a tactical one. Striking low-altitude torpedo bombers might spare capital ships, but gives dive bombers overland a clearer path to destroy airfields. Reversing the focus spares the airfields but leaves ships more exposed. Escort fighters might be left untouched entirely unless they directly block an attack run. Each decision alters which parts of the harbor take losses and which survive to fight another day. Any group the Raptor bypasses still carries enough firepower to inflict significant harm. The scale here means survival doesn't require every attacker to get through. 10% of a wave successfully releasing torpedoes or bombs is enough to sink, crater, or burn key targets. Even with best-case sequencing, the result is mitigation, not total prevention. Raptor's speed narrows, but doesn't erase these gaps. It can maintain supersonic cruise without afterburners for long legs, yet crossing the harbor repeatedly, climbing, diving, and accelerating toward multiple formations all consume fuel quickly. In a fight without refueling, each reposition must balance immediacy against conserving enough to remain in play as long as possible. Racing to cover every possible angle would end the sortie sooner, reducing total impact over the course of both waves. The second wave holds another subtle advantage. Even minimal reports can prompt changes. Survivors of the first wave could radio short, vague warnings of a high-speed, unseen attacker. Lacking detail won't identify it, but could alter patterns. Flights may spread, change altitudes, or fly tighter around bombers in the hope of catching it. Even modest alterations in spacing could force the Raptor into less efficient firing sequences, slightly reducing the odds of multi-kill passes and increasing the need for closer, riskier approaches. Speed mismatch can also be a double-edged factor. At cruise, the Raptor can close on slow bombers so fast that it risks overshooting if it relies on guns or infrared missiles. Overshooting means looping back, and those loops take seconds to set up, time during which others elsewhere are reaching release point. Long shots with AMRAAMs avoid this, but by the second wave those weapons may be spent or in short supply. Splitting fire between the two waves leaves both diminished, but not dismantled. Concentrating on one can nearly erase it, but hands the other a clearer path. Reducing torpedo bombers in the first wave might radically lessen ship losses, but leaves second-wave dive bombers to hammer infrastructure. Inverting the focus preserves more infrastructure at the potential cost of heavier naval damage. Every combination trades one form of damage for another. At its core, this is the problem of simultaneity. The F-22's technological advantage ensures it will dominate any single engagement, but multiple threats arriving from different headings and altitudes over the same minutes guarantee some will operate without interference. That is enough in an attack of this size to ensure damage is done despite its presence. Modern sensors and weapons extend the reach far beyond anything possible in 1941. Yet they cannot compress the geography or time enough to cover every approach. Those openings, small in duration or area, are the avenues for attackers to complete their runs. Even with severe disruption to formation timing and heavy attrition of strike aircraft, damage will still register on the harbor and surrounding installations. The best one fighter can offer in this scenario is to force that damage lower than history's record, not erase it. And each successive pass, climb, and high-speed transition is drawing from a finite supply of resources no one here can restore. Fuel and ammunition, the one-mission limit. What limits the Raptor here isn't what it can do in the fight, it's what happens once the fight is underway. The F-22 depends on JP-8, a modern military jet fuel formulated for high-performance turbines. In 1941, every drop of aviation fuel stored in Hawaii was intended for piston engines like those in the P-40 Warhawk. The two fuels are not interchangeable, and the airfields at Pearl Harbor would have no way to store, handle, or even connect JP-8 to the Raptor systems. Without compatible fuel, once its internal tanks run dry, there is no way to get it airborne again. That makes the sortie a one-time event, regardless of how many enemy aircraft remain. Those internal tanks hold roughly 18,000 pounds of fuel. In modern operations, that capacity, paired with careful mission planning and in-flight refueling from KC-series tankers, supports long patrols and sustained combat. Here, there is no tanker support and no compatible fuel waiting on the ground. At high-efficiency subsonic cruise, the Raptor can cover large distances on what it carries. But combat is not cruise. Hard turns, steep climbs, and supersonic sprints all drive fuel use far above nominal rates. Engaging multiple widely spaced formations means using exactly those performance modes. Cutting into the available time, the jet can remain in an optimal fighting position. The scale of that consumption changes the nature of the sortie. In a high-tempo engagement, switching between high-G maneuvers, supersonic dashes, and rapid altitude changes, the meaningful combat window drops sharply. Without aerial refueling or compatible supplies on the ground, the pilot is working within a fixed span of endurance while still keeping the reserve needed to return to base. Every minute spent in full military power or afterburner is a trade-off against total mission length. Ammunition is the second absolute limit. The jet launches with 6 AIM-120D3 AMRAAMs for beyond visual range kills and 2 AIM-9X Block II plus infrared missiles for shorter range attacks. Once an AMRAAM leaves the bay, nothing in 1941 can replace it. Rearming requires modern loading gear, specialized test equipment, and personnel trained to work on these systems. Likewise, the Sidewinders need secure handling and integration checks that no one on Oahu could perform at the time. Each weapon fired not only removes a target from the air, but subtracts from the Raptor's ability to influence later phases of the battle. That leaves the a Vulcan cannon as the last line of armament. It carries 480 rounds of 20 mm ammunition. At maximum rate, that entire load could be gone in seconds. In air-to-air combat, cannon fire is usually managed in short bursts to conserve ammunition and improve accuracy. But even with careful shooting, a few close-range engagements can empty the drum. After that, the aircraft retains all of its speed, agility, and sensing capability, but with no way to inflict damage directly. These are not just abstract numbers. They dictate how the pilot must think. Firing all long-range missiles early might thin the first wave effectively, but the second wave would have to be engaged up close, burning more fuel and exposing the aircraft inside visual range. Using the gun heavily early on might destroy several targets quickly, but when the ammunition is gone, the jet's presence becomes a form of intimidation rather than a direct threat. Maneuvering aggressively for every intercept racks up fuel burn that erodes the mission's timing, ending it even if missiles and ammunition remain. The distances around Oahu are not vast by modern standards, but in a fight against scattered attackers, even a few miles, reposition at high thrust eats into the margin of available fuel, crossing from one group of incoming bombers to another approaching from an entirely different bearing demands speed if they are to be intercepted before release. Each of those transits is fuel that cannot be recovered. In choosing where to engage, the pilot is also choosing where not to be. In modern combat, an F-22 can complete its mission, return to base, take on fuel, reload missiles, and launch again once maintenance checks are complete, often within the same day. None of that is possible here. When the jet touches down in 1941 Hawaii, the personnel on hand would have no compatible fuel, no ordnance to fit its weapons bays, and no systems to integrate or test its munitions. Even the tools to open panels or connect fuel hoses would be missing. From a practical standpoint, once it lands, it stops being a combat asset. That one-mission reality forces a different kind of planning. The pilot's goal can't be to engage every target. It has to be to apply finite weapons and fuel where they will make the most strategic difference. Each AIM-120 needs to be considered against its potential to remove the most dangerous attackers before they can inflict damage. Each climb or dash must be weighed against how much combat time it removes from the overall sortie. Precision in allocation becomes as important as precision in shooting. The constraint is magnified by the absence of the infrastructure the jet was designed to work with. In modern service, KC-135 or KC-46 tankers extend mission time almost indefinitely within a theater. Ground crews handle rapid turnaround with specialized fuel handling, ammunition loading systems, and diagnostic equipment. In 1941, none of those elements exist. Without them, the aircraft's combat timeline is fixed from the moment it takes off, knowing that there is no second sortie reshapes expectations. The Raptor can intercept formations far from the harbor, break them apart before weapon release, and keep pressure on surviving attackers until fuel and munitions are at critical levels. It can influence the sequence of the attack and disrupt the coordination between waves. But every shot and every maneuver is one fewer available for the rest of the battle. Even if circumstances allow the jet to return to base between waves, nothing changes materially. With no JP-8, the tanks stay empty. With no appropriate ammunition, the cannon stays dry. With no spare missiles, the bays stay bare. Modern maintenance is an integral part of the aircraft's ability to fight again, and without it, the plane's advantage is confined to the duration of a single launch. The difference it can make is thus about impact inside that single window. Stealth, speed, and advanced weapons can dismantle parts of the attack before those formations ever see Oahu. How that limited supply of weapons is spent will decide which threats are reduced and which get through. The more effectively those finite shots are used, the greater the effect before landing ends the mission. The damage it could prevent. With a modern loadout, the Raptor launches into the battle armed for a single, concentrated mission. It carries 6 AIM-120D3 AMRAAMs for beyond visual range engagements and 2 AIM-9X Block II Plus missiles for close-in work, all complemented by its internal M61A2 Vulcan cannon with 480 rounds of 20mm ammunition. In contemporary operations, those weapons would be distributed across multiple sorties, coordinated with other aircraft, and reserved for engagements in which the relative position of enemies might be uncertain or contested by countermeasures. Here, in 1941, every missile could be fired at a separate bomber without concern for radar jamming, decoys, or long-range defensive fire. Even so, outcomes would still depend on launch geometry, missile reliability, and target maneuvers. Analyses of similar hypothetical scenarios suggest a plausible effectiveness in the range of roughly 10 to 13 bomber kills across the sortie, assuming the pilot focuses fire on the most vulnerable and strategically significant targets. That figure comes with important caveats. The actual toll would be shaped by exactly where and when missiles are fired, whether follow-up shots are needed, how quickly new formations can be intercepted, and how much ammunition must be kept in reserve for the second wave. It is a model-based forecast, a way to visualize potential rather than a fixed prediction. The key to making that effect matter lies in selecting which aircraft to remove. Among the attackers, torpedo bombers posed the greatest direct threat to the U.S. battleships in the harbor. In the historical raid, multiple ships were sunk or heavily damaged by torpedo impacts below the waterline. Dive bombers struck a broader variety of targets, fuel depots, repair facilities, and airfields, causing losses that slowed the Navy's ability to recover and respond. Fighters contributed little to ground or ship destruction, and existed to keep defenders away from these payload-carrying aircraft. If the Raptor spends the majority of its initial missile shots on the lead elements of torpedo bomber formations before they reach release point, the impact on ship survivability could be significant. Even preventing a handful of torpedoes from entering the water might reduce the number of fatal, below-armor hits on capital ships. Instead of capsizing or settling into the mud at the harbor's bottom, some vessels could remain level, keeping their decks and some weapons systems operable. However, achieving that outcome depends not only on which aircraft are destroyed, but also on precisely when in the attack sequence they are intercepted. The short-range AIM-9XS could then be allocated to bombers in the middle stages of their approach or to commanders flying at the front of dive bomber elements. Removing those leaders would fragment attack runs, forcing less experienced pilots to adjust or attack unsupervised, which historically increased miss rates and target errors. That opportunity is fleeting. Bombers close the final mile of their approach in under a minute. which means the pilot must already be in position to take the shot. Once missiles are gone, the Vulcan cannon becomes the sole offensive weapon. Its volume of fire against unarmored 1941 airframes means even a brief, accurate burst should destroy or disable a target. Each firing pass, however, requires exposing the Raptor at closer range. That increases fuel use and compresses the available time to intercept other aircraft. It also means that each gun attack must be against a target whose destruction offers a measurable benefit to the defenders. A bomber late in its run is a lower priority than one still carrying its ordnance. In pure numbers, eliminating perhaps 10 to 13 bombers before they release their weapons could mean that dozens of individual bombs or torpedoes never reach Pearl Harbor's ships, fuel stores, or airfields. In weight of explosives, it equates to many thousands of pounds of ordnance absent from the battle. But those figures describe a best-case concentration of effort, real-world constraints. Attack staging, target positioning, and the second wave threat will inevitably trim them down. The true measure is not aircraft destroyed in isolation, but the type of damage those aircraft will now never cause. Each bomber removed from the order of battle also reduces coordinated pressure on the defenders. The Japanese plan called for striking multiple target types in overlapping windows, saturating gun crews so that they could not focus on any single attacker. By thinning out one arm of the strike, the Raptor leaves others without the mutual coverage they were timed to have. Torpedo bombers without fighter escort are more vulnerable to surviving U.S. aircraft. Dive bombers arriving too early or late are more exposed to anti-aircraft fire focused entirely on them. The impact of preserving harborside infrastructure cannot be overstated. Intact fuel tanks keep replenishment local rather than drawing on vulnerable tanker convoys. A surviving dry dock turns post-attack repairs from months to weeks. Operational airfields allow for immediate dispersal of surviving aircraft, preventing follow-up damage. In the actual 1941 aftermath, the loss of such assets compounded the effects of ship destruction, denying attackers their full strike potential buys time. Arguably, the most valuable resource in the opening moves of any war. Crew losses on the attacking side are another strategic benefit. Aircrews for torpedo and dive bombers required significant training and coordination. In the Pacific Theater, replacing those crews quickly was not always possible, especially early in the conflict. Each loss might reduce the striking power of the carrier group for weeks, or even remove certain attack profiles from immediate future operation. While this does not alter the day's outcome for Oahu, it affects the opponent's capacity to mount similar raids in the near term. The effect is not limited to material outcomes. Seeing attackers destroyed far from the target changes how defenders approach the rest of the fight. Anti-aircraft gunners might hold their positions longer when they realize some formations are reaching them already weakened. Surviving American pilots may take riskier intercept routes if the initial results suggest the attackers can be beaten back at range. Conversely, the attackers, accustomed to near total surprise, face the shock of an unanticipated and uncontested loss rate before engaging their objectives. On the surface, the visible reduction in attacking aircraft numbers before they reach weapons release range directly shapes the pattern of destruction below. In one scenario, a departure from the historical record might be a battleship that takes partial damage but remains afloat because fewer torpedoes were in the water. In another, an airfield that remains functional because only a handful of bombs fell rather than a full squadron's load. None of these are certainties. They rely on where and when attrition occurs, but they illustrate the scale of change even a modest cut in bomber numbers could bring. If we plot out the implications, the Raptor's best possible performance would not save every major target. Some ships and facilities would still take serious damage. A portion of the second wave would still find undefended approach vectors while the jet refueled or rearmed, something impossible in this scenario. But the opening force of the strike could be blunted, leaving more U.S. capability intact at the attack's end. That shift has strategic value well beyond the raw count of enemy aircraft destroyed. In an engagement where timing, surprise, and concentration were the attacker's main strengths, undermining even one of those factors changes the framework of the battle. Reducing bomber numbers at the right moment distorts the carefully built rhythm of the raid, introduces defensive breathing space, and removes ordnance from the equation before it can be used. The destruction prevented is measured both in hardware spared and in the altered pace of the conflict from that point forward. As formations lose elements over the water, the flow of the strike inevitably changes. Gaps open in the once tight groups. Escorts peel off to search for threats instead of guarding the bombers. And both above and below, participants begin to realize this battle is not unfolding according to plan. Psychological shock on both sides. In the skies over Oahu, the Japanese formations had begun the morning in tight, disciplined order, each fighter locked into escort position, each bomber holding a steady line toward its assigned target. Then, with no visible threat, aircraft start disappearing. A bomber in mid-formation bursts apart, scattering debris into the slipstream. Another slips away trailing smoke, plunging toward the sea. At first, the groups keep flying as if the missing aircraft will rejoin, but they never do. That brief moment of denial gives way to hesitation, and hesitations turn into mistakes. These crews were trained to counter threats they could see, enemy fighters diving from above or sliding into their 6 o'clock where a sharp turn or dive might shake them off. Here, nothing fits their expectations. There is no shape on the horizon to line up in the gun sight, no rattle of incoming fire, no sudden shadows sweeping overhead. Wingmen simply vanish. Some pilots drift out of position, scanning empty sky. Others tighten up too much, creating dangerous overlap. The precision that kept them safe against conventional defenders starts to break down with each minor correction. For bomber crews, every adjustment matters. Their low-level runs depend on fixed altitudes, speeds, and headings. Knocking 2 or 3 planes out of a section forces the rest to fill gaps, change angles, or dodge falling wreckage. Those shifts ripple forward. Torpedo drops may be seconds late, dive bomb release points may be off by tens of yards. The mechanics of delivering an accurate blow erode under the strain of simply staying airborne and in formation. Escorts feel the disruption too. A zero assigned to cover torpedo bombers relies on knowing where the danger will come from. Without a visible attacker, that coverage becomes guesswork. Some fan out in searching arcs above and behind, hunting for a threat that does not reveal itself. Every fighter that drifts away leaves its bombers less protected and the formation's outer screen full of holes. The confusion drives small units to act independently instead of as part of a larger whole. Stress cuts deeper with each loss. In normal combat, keeping eyes moving through the canopy offers a measure of control. Enemy in sight means a chance to react. Now the threat is unseen until the destruction hits. Pilots feel exposed even flying straight and level. Tight formations, once a source of mutual support, now feel like confined spaces where one hit could take several with it. Some open the gaps, creating space that weakens mutual defense but offers a false sense of safety. Even without knowing the nature of what they face, crews grasp one fact: it can reach them at will. No turn, climb, or dive seems to matter. There is no pattern to decode, no tactic to counter it. Individual reactions begin to replace coordinated moves. Formation discipline frays into a collection of isolated flights, each hoping the unseen hunter picks someone else next. Below, American observers begin to witness the effects before they understand the cause. Watching from ships or airfield perimeters, they see incoming lines of enemy planes suddenly thinning in the distance, puffs of fire marking losses long before anti-aircraft gunners have them in range. At first, some mistake it for accurate AA fire from another position, but the range and timing don't match. It becomes clear that something else, something they cannot see, is striking the attacker. For defenders already manning their guns, this is a visible shift in the odds. Formations that should arrive in overwhelming numbers instead come in broken-up packets or lone stragglers. Gunners can pour their fire into fewer aircraft at a time, increasing the odds of a kill and buying precious seconds to re-aim between passes. The sight of attackers being cut down before they've even engaged boosts confidence in a way training alone never could. Pilots scrambled from nearby strips may not realize the cause either, but they arrive to find enemy formations smaller and less organized than expected. Instead of facing a wall of guns and coordinated turns, they encounter scattered flights with obvious gaps. For airmen bracing to engage superior numbers, that change transforms the fight from a survival mission to one where they can deal real damage. Japanese squadron leaders work to restore order, crowding radio channels with instructions, but the replies are uneven or silent. Some aircraft are too focused on evasive flying to respond. Others are already gone. With no radar picture and only brief sightings, leaders can't assess how much of their force is missing until it's too late to reassign roles. The voice traffic starts to reflect the erosion of control, with urgent calls overlapping and no clear sense of who is answering. On the ground, American mechanics and support personnel hear those radios too, catching fragments of disordered enemy chatter through interception or translation. Even without full context, they notice the change from confident, crisp coordination to scattered transmissions. Word spreads among defensive positions that the attack isn't as synchronized as feared. For sailors on the harbor ships, the mental weight shifts when they see attackers dropping before reaching weapon release points. Torpedo bombers go down far out over the water. Dive bombers break off their dives early. That slight breathing room changes the rhythm of the defense. Damage control crews can work without the same crushing wave of incoming strikes, and anti-aircraft gunners can pace their shots instead of firing in near panic. Most Americans benefiting from this shift will never see the source. No glimpse of a dark shape overhead, no roar sweeping past. All they know is that fewer bombs are dropping and attackers aren't coming in the same tightened waves they had expected. Whatever is causing it, the effect is visible and reinforcing. The morale boost doesn't erase the danger. Bombs still land, ships still burn, and there are still more planes inbound. But the perception changes from facing an unstoppable tide to confronting smaller, beatable groups. That difference between inevitability and possibility can influence every decision made under fire. To the attacking crews, the opposite effect takes hold. Every unexplained loss adds to a nagging sense of uncertainty. Each radio call met with silence forces them to question the integrity of the force around them. Precision aiming suffers when the pilot can't be sure how many allies still support their run or what threats remain unseen above. Torpedo pilots may release early, afraid to hold steady toward the target. Dive bombers might pull out before ideal release altitudes, costing accuracy in exchange for even a chance at survival. Over time in this first wave, and as the second approaches, the mental landscape on both sides has changed markedly. Confidence in an overwhelming, perfectly timed strike gives way to improvisation and self-preservation among the attackers. Among the defenders, the shift is toward active hope. Seeing that the attack can be blunted before reaching them changes expectations of what can be saved. Yet under the surface of the morale swing is a fixed constraint. The jet causing it can only fight once. With fuel and weapons finite, confusion can only be spread so far before its advantage runs out. For all its impact, the Raptor is a temporary present. The question for anyone watching, whether from the deck of a battleship or from the cockpit of a defending fighter, is what those shaken formations can still accomplish after this disruption. Would the confusion be enough to save a ship, or just enough to narrow the scale of loss? Tell us your guess in the comments, because no matter how profound the psychological shock, there remains the bigger problem of numbers, and the next part of the battle will show whether this disruption can meaningfully change the outcome. Would it change history? Even with perfect use of its sensors, weapons, and fuel, the Raptor would still face the limitations of scale. The Japanese strike force totaled more than 350 aircraft, split into two large waves with multiple attack groups coming from different bearings. Removing a dozen bombers before they reached Oahu would be significant in terms of preventing some hits, but in percentage terms, that is only a small slice of the total offensive power. The attack plan had built-in redundancy. Multiple squadrons were tasked with the same targets specifically so that the loss of some aircraft would not stop the mission. This means the jet could blunt the blow but not erase it. Where its unique capabilities matter is in target selection. By engaging bombers far before visual contact, the Raptor could remove key formation leaders and the most lethal aircraft, torpedo bombers and dive bombers in position to strike capital ships and critical fuel or repair infrastructure. That kind of selective attrition disrupts timing, forces formations into less efficient attack runs, and could plausibly spare one or two major ships in a best-case sequence of engagement. But this is conditional. The number and position of surviving bombers, weather, attack angles, and simple chance would all influence the final damage pattern. The second wave compounds the challenge. By then, most or all of the long-range AMRAAMs would be gone, leaving only AIM-9X missiles and the 20mm Vulcan cannon. Those demand closer engagements, each taking longer and burning more fuel. The second wave might arrive more scattered, partly due to radio warnings from survivors, but scattered formations are harder to engage en masse. The jet could still destroy several more bombers, but not prevent a portion from making their drop. Time pressure also works against total prevention. The real attack was over in under 2 hours from the first inbound contact to the last bombs falling. In that window, a single fighter must intercept, fire, break away, and reposition multiple times against groups coming from different directions and altitudes. At supersonic speed, the Raptor can cross Oahu in seconds, but every switch of target group still costs minutes, and the attack unfolds too quickly for every group to be intercepted before release. From a tactical standpoint, the pilot's priority would be to focus on the highest value threats. By engaging torpedo bombers first, followed by organized dive bomber sections, and only targeting fighters when necessary, the Raptor could cut deeply into the strike's ability to sink ships or knock out key facilities. That would not halt all attacks. More than 100 bombers per wave means that even after removing 15 or more across the morning, ample force remains to inflict serious harm. The practical effect is that the heaviest blows could be reduced, but the raid would still succeed in hitting multiple objectives. The psychological and coordination effects would be real. Squadrons losing critical aircraft before the attack could see their timing slip and choose suboptimal altitudes or headings. Some might target secondary positions instead, seeking easier approaches. Others, untouched by the Raptor's strikes, could still execute their plans exactly as briefed. On the American side, defenders would gain morale and time. Smaller, more spread-out attack packets are easier to counter, allowing ground gunners and any airborne interceptors to concentrate fire. But the jump from changing the scope to preventing the event outright comes down to scale and endurance. The Raptor's loadout speed and stealth give it dominance in any single engagement, but a lone fighter can't be in all critical sectors at once. Its reach is unmatched, but its fuel and munitions are finite. It was designed to fight as part of a larger force with shared awareness and mutual coverage, not to defend an entire harbor alone. In raw numbers, trimming the first wave by perhaps 10 to 15 of its most dangerous bombers could markedly reduce damage to 1 or 2 large ships, and cutting another handful from the second could keep certain facilities operational. Percentage-wise, that might be under 10% of attackers destroyed directly. But because these would be the aircraft most able to deliver crippling strikes, the proportional reduction in critical damage could be far higher. The strategic value isn't in the fraction itself, but in which losses they represent. Historically, the raid succeeded because it achieved surprise and mass destructive power in minutes. The presence of a 2025 fighter would remove the unopposed condition and erode the potency of the first strike. But unless the majority of bombers were eliminated before release, key results, damaged ships, burning airfields, wrecked facilities would still happen. The U.S. would still face repairs, casualties, and the operational shock of a major fleet base being hit. Even so, altering which ships survive intact or which facilities remain functional has long-term consequences. A battleship left afloat can return to service sooner. An airfield still in operation can launch reconnaissance and fighters in the days after. Intact fuel and repair capabilities allow deployments without waiting for replacements from the mainland. These gains wouldn't remove the war's opening setbacks, but they could alter the tempo of operations and the balance of available forces in the Pacific's early months. For Japan, the cost of an incomplete victory could be high. Losing dozens of trained bomber crews without disabling the Pacific Fleet would weaken follow-on operations, reducing the combat power of its carrier groups in subsequent months. An attack that burns resources but leaves the U.S. with much of its fleet and infrastructure intact would also fail to deliver the intended deterrent effect, potentially stiffening American resolve sooner. In the end, the F-22's presence would not transform December 7th into a flawless defense. The strike would still cause destruction, the base would still need repairs, and the war in the Pacific would still begin with a serious blow. But the scale of loss could be markedly smaller, and the time needed to restore U.S. naval power noticeably shorter. In military terms, preventing the loss of even part of the fleet at a war's start is a substantial win. It can shave months off recovery and allow counter-operations far sooner. So the likely outcome is a day that remains infamous, but with fewer ships lost, more vital infrastructure standing, and a fleet better able to respond. Tactical domination in specific moments, yes. A total reversal of the strategic impact, no. big tactical wins, limited strategic reversal. Let's summarize why. A single F-22 could disrupt key parts of the Pearl Harbor attack, but not prevent it outright. Its speed, stealth, and sensors would give it dominance in any one engagement, yet ammunition, fuel, logistics, and sheer numbers dictate hard limits on what it could defend. By removing high-value bombers early, it could reduce critical damage far beyond what its small share of total kills might suggest. Still, without modern support infrastructure, its impact ends with its first sortie. Which targets would you have prioritized if you were the pilot? Share your thoughts below and like and subscribe for more evidence-based hypotheticals.